if you're convinced someone's going to lose a game and you want to throw your hat into the ring and win some money, I'd suggest doing it at Alpha Draft. It's a fantasy esports service, so it's in the fantasy realm. There's no cops that can come and get you. Although I guess if you're in your mind in the fantasy realm, maybe Agent Smith or something, or Sauron could appear and attack you. But aside from that, in the real world, in the grounded sense, you will just win money if you pick correctly the people you think will win the game. So, likewise, all adds up there. You won't end up dazed. You'll have mad swag as a result of it. Let's not, steel yourself for what should be quite an enjoyable experience. And you'll be deborn again with lots of Skrilla. So that's enough. Fantasy Esports, alphadraft.com in the description box below. Now, there's been a recent, let's see, how would you describe it? A recent kind of turn in the whole case on Skadoodle and Swag and their involvement within the ban, which got Swag banned, and AZK banned, and Steel banned, and Daze banned. Everyone banned from iBuyPower's 5-man lineup except Skadoodle. And so a new interesting piece of information came to light, or at least it'd already been out there, but it hadn't been fully publicised. And I had plans to potentially do some kind of video or article about it anyway, but they've now been fast-tracked since it's out there anyway, so I thought I'd go ahead and throw in my video on it. So for the people who were around then, since this was over a year ago, on August 21st of 2014, not that long after ESL won Cologne, the one that NIP won with Fifth Florence, so you can see quite a while ago, Netcode Guides played a match against iBuyPower online in CEVO Professional. And iBuyPower had been a team who'd been expected to have a chance to do well at the major, but they'd gone out in group stage yet again, as they'd done in all the majors to that point in time. So they come home, they've got to play this Netcode Guides game. Netcode Guides is actually a team which the website that sponsors it is co-owned by Dazed. He still does work for them now. And so under these circumstances, supposedly Dazed comes up with the idea. Like, he looks at the CSGO Lounge odds before the game. He says like half an hour before the game, and he says, right, this is a perfect game to throw. And you can see how obviously it is in a sense, because if he in any sense co-owns the other team, he can to some degree manage the aspects there where they're not going to say anything about it. We can ensure that it's going to go this way. Maybe we even hint to them. It's never really been said, but we can hint to them, oh, we're going to throw the game to you, so just like play this way and you'll beat us or whatever. But it's decided, supposedly within a short frame of time, that iBuyPower is going to throw the game, but bet on the other side to win the game so that they win the skins and win a large amount of money from it. And the reason why they're going to win the skins is because even though there was a max bet you could place at the time, like something like $240 worth of skins per account, they get a third party, in fact a couple of third parties, to use other accounts to make max bets against the opponent, therefore racking the amount up to, I think they said the total amount was something like $20,000, but it had to be split amongst everyone, remember, including the people who with the accounts taking their share, and so eventually a split comes to all the iBuyPower players. Now, when the game happens, the throw, it's on Season, which is a map that isn't used except in ESEA and CEVO, and it's quite a ridiculous scoreline. Netcode Guides win 16-4. They win the first half as CT 11-4. And as a result of it, a story comes out, I think it was a few weeks later, by Richard Lewis suggesting this might have been thrown, that he has some evidence for it, or some testimony rather, from sources. Dazed, and I think Steele might have made some comments or refused to comment on it. I know that Dazed particularly, though, did attack Richard, the journalist who'd written the article, and imply he was lying or he didn't know what he was talking about. And so in some sense, potentially damage his character there and defame him for his job. And so it took a while, took a few months. It wasn't until around MLG Aspen, actually, which was in late January of the next year, that this was really being looked into by Valve, and word came down, right, there's going to be a decision made. And right after the MLGX Games Aspen, they were all banned from the lineup except Skadoodle. And the reason why Skadoodle wasn't banned was there was no evidence of skins going into his account as a result of this particular game. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because the real reason why they'd been banned wasn't to do with the initial story, wasn't to do with the match. Valve wasn't looking into it. Valve didn't care about that. But eventually, one of the third parties who were helping to broker the betting, because they had to use the other accounts, was a guy called Deborn, who was a player who was a former pro in 1.6 and been playing on lower level in CSGO. And he also is someone who in real life had done sports betting as a job, and he had gotten another person, and they had conspired to set up the other accounts to make the max bets, which would then get the money through to the iBuyPower guys. And he'd then told his girlfriend about it. His girlfriend had then been the main source of the information to Richard Lewis, and then Richard Lewis had gotten like screenshots of her phone and the texts that she'd had with Deborn explaining that he'd done the throw, and he'd then shown those to Valve, and then Valve look at that and they go, right, well, we have to act now, because if that gets out there in public that there's literally screenshots of it, we have to at least look into it. So they look into it, they check all the trades, they track them all, and they see the skins going from those accounts into the accounts of the iBuyPower players. They ban those players, but they don't ban Skadoodle because he didn't have skins going into his account. So that's what everyone should know so far, and anyone who wasn't around then, I've got you up to date on the story there. Now, one of the problems with this incident is, okay, Skadoodle wasn't banned, no skins there, no one has a problem with that, it seems. Swag was one of the players banned, though, and the problem was, at the time, Swag was 17, a few months from turning 18. He's someone who had been in the CS 1.6 scene since a very young age. He'd gone to ESEA lands at age 15. And so because he's a young guy, the whole age question comes in. How do we treat people who are younger? If you're younger, are you more easily influenced by older people, authority figures? Naturally, that's a psychological phenomenon we see. Are you less likely to stand up for something? Are you less confident in yourself? A lot of young people haven't really found themselves, or don't really know what values they stand for, or they're just still learning what it's like to be an adult. It's only a few years earlier that they were essentially considered a child by the law. So yeah, it's a murky area in that particular sense. But here's where it gets interesting. So in the case of Swag, even though he did receive skins, was a part of the throw, and has never denied that, people always say, but I'm sure it was Dazed and Steel as well, who, because they don't like the Dazed and Steel, they influenced him into making this. And so, it wasn't really his choice. It's like he was part of a cult, and then just some charismatic person told him he had to do it. And so he did it, even though maybe he didn't necessarily want to. So should he have the same punishment? Maybe he should get unbanned. But here's where it gets interesting, because I've always said on that particular one, it's not as clear-cut as people think, which is something we'll go into. But Steel mentioned on his stream a few days ago an incident with AZK having publicly stated that Skadoodle essentially was in on it all the way, but there's other circumstances as to why Skadoodle didn't get the skins. It wasn't just that he played, the others all did it, and he was like, listen, you can do what you want to do, and then the match happened, and then afterwards he was like, listen, I'm not someone who would do something like that, it's not values, I want to accept the skins, you guys accept the skins if you want, I'm taking a stance here. That's the way people want to present it, because they like Skadoodle and they don't like Dazed and Steel, but AZK's testimony suggests that's not as simple as it seems. It's more of a timing issue and circumstantial aspects that might make you rethink the whole issue as a kind of thought experiment. So let's go through the whole topic. Let's talk about Swag and Skadoodle, because there is the dual element of the young guy and the guy who didn't accept the skins. So in terms of Swag, he actually did an interview, which is a few months after the fact, once they'd been banned, which was with Richard Lewis, where he actually explained a number of the details of this particular case from his perspective. So he even says that when Dazed came to him with the idea to throw the game, he said he being Dazed, he just kept saying that only good things could come of it and that there was no way we'd get caught. Players stopped resisting. You couldn't argue with Sam being Dazed. So again, the notion there is that Dazed is the leader. We all have to listen to him. We know he's a leader in game. Dazed is very forceful. He wants things to be done his way. If he isn't, he's going to complain. Then it says Josh, that's Steel, was the next person to agree with Sam's idea. He said that he'd be okay with it. He didn't join in persuading us, but it became a lot harder for anyone else to say no. Now, this is very interesting here. So first and foremost, with that information from Swag there, just his testimony, remember, not anyone else's side of things, and the fact that he's young, and the circumstances of, Dazed was the one who came up with the idea, it is very easy to just look at it and say, right, it's clear cut, it's black and white. Dazed convinced him, Dazed said he'd do it, and then even though Steel didn't try to convince him, because he said he'd do it as well, they knew that was 2 out of the 5, you only need 1 more to get a majority, and so other people didn't fight against it, and they just did what they said. That's a very simple way to look at it, and that's where a lot of people, I think, are taking the situation. But first and foremost, let's look at Swag, his interactions with iBuyPower, and his history of being influenced, because this is very interesting. A lot of people won't know this. Swag had played with the Complexity, formerly Quantic lineup, throughout the last half of 2013, roughly, basically, and then into the first 3 months of 2014. And with this lineup, he'd been one of their best players. He was like the second best player after Hiko. They were the 2 obvious stars, though. He'd been one of the people who'd helped them make their run at the first major in November of 2013, DreamHack Winter, to the semi-finals, beating out Astana Dragons. They beat very games in the group stage. So they made the highest placing that any team ever has at the major. He was one of the main reasons for that. Then, early on the next year, they have the performance where they've just gone to the major at this point in time, in March of 2014. EMS won Katowice, actually. They made it to the round of 8, but they had to play NIP there. And when they played NIP, they actually won a map. They won Dust 2, and Swag went absolutely ham, had a crazy performance, won like a 1v4, 1v5 or something at one point with a Deagle. So he had a great performance. He won them a map against NIP, which was still a big deal back then. Not a lot of teams were doing that often. They were an incredibly good team. And so people thought to themselves after this tournament, right, things are getting better for this team. They can improve on that as things go on. Maybe add a player into the mix, get stronger. Meanwhile, iBuyPower's team, even though they'd been the best NA team domestically, they used to beat Complexity all the time, because it was before they were Cloud9. And at ESEA lands, they used to beat Complexity, and they'd even won the ESEA land at the beginning of 2014, which is the one where they'd beaten Titan, former Very Games, in the final, the number 1 team in the world. So even though iBuyPower is considered the better team and has the more skilled players, Complexity is the one that's making the playoffs of all these majors and doing better internationally, and always had done better internationally, actually. Outside of NA borders, by the way, not ESEA LAN. So in this scenario, bearing in mind iBuyPower's just gone out in the group stage again disappointing everyone, you'd think there's no reason as to why anyone would go from Complexity over to iBuyPower unless like someone else was brought into Complexity and they were kicked out. But out of nowhere, on the 24th of March, Swag transfers himself from Complexity to iBuyPower. Now, under these circumstances, on the outside, doesn't make any sense. So you might think, oh, well, okay. But once you look into it and you talk to Swag and you talk to Steel and you talk to, not Steel, you talk to Dazed from iBuyPower, the in-game leader of iBuyPower, and you talk to people from Complexity, you know, they're going to tell you the reasons why, and you're going to find out some behind-the-scenes issues, and you're going to know after that fact. Here's what's interesting, and I'll link it up here. I did an interview with Dazed, and I asked him about why Swag joined iBuyPower, and I asked him this after Dazed has already been banned, so it's in 2015. So this is almost a year after the fact, well, more like 10 months after the fact. And to that day, he still didn't know the real reason as to why Swag left. Swag had never told him why he left Complexity and wanted to join iBuyPower. He wasn't even someone who talked to Swag. Swag just PM'd him on Steam one day, said, I want to join iBuyPower. He asked him, why is that? Swag wouldn't tell him why. Swag joins iBuyPower. Now, after the fact, Daze says that it comes out in public. I think Swag said something along the lines of that he left Complexity because he didn't like the way he was being treated by Hiko, or he felt that he was being in some sense bullied by Hiko, whatever that means. Now, what's interesting is, I'll link again up here, I did an interview with Hiko months before that when Hiko was still on Complexity, Cloud9 at the time. And I also asked him, you know, why did Swag leave? Now, he again seems like he doesn't entirely know. His only theory he can come up with is he assumes that Dazed had gotten in the ear of Swag on the trip back from Katowice to America while they're at the airport at some point in time. Now, Dazed denies that. Dazed says actually they weren't even going to the same connecting airport. He wasn't someone who talked to Swag. In fact, I think the person he said he talked to was Nothing and Impulsive, which, by the way, I can actually corroborate, because in the Katowice airport, at least, on the way out, I was with all these guys on the same initial connecting flight to go to Amsterdam. And I noticed that, yeah, Impulsive, Nothing, and Dazed were sat together talking. Swag and the others, they were all like in a different group, actually, like Sean Gers, Semphis, Swag. As I remember, we were in a different group of people, and eventually Nothing came over and joined them. I didn't see interaction directly, so at least on that one, I don't know about another connecting flight, there was no interaction there. So this story does have something to it when you add all the pieces together. You have to remember, that's just a theory from Hiko, and presumably Hiko wasn't going to the same connecting airport, so he wasn't actually there to witness any kind of discussion. So immediately we have Swag bizarrely leaving a situation where he's in a potentially a better favourable situation, going over to iBuyPower. Not a team with salary. I mean, also the Complexity guys didn't really have salary, but not necessarily a team that makes a lot of sense, but not being influenced by anyone and just making this wild choice out of nowhere because that's what he wants to do. And that's where it gets interesting, because Dazed suggests, as he did in his interview, which I linked to before, Swag isn't someone where once he gets an idea in his mind, he's going to happen and you can't persuade him otherwise. And he might not even explain why it's going to be the case. It's just going to be the way it is. He's very stubborn in that particular sense. So, Dazed also mentions that Swag at some point on stream after the throw, after being banned, had even said at some point in time that no one actually convinced him to throw, that it was just presented and he just went along with it, which obviously goes counter to what Swag said to some degree. So I don't know where that stream is. I'm not going to look through thousands of hours of stream footage, but okay, Swag can come out and deny this if he wishes to. There's an issue as well that even in Swag's testimony, he says that, okay, Daze come up with the idea and he was trying to convince people, like, you know, what bad can happen. Then he says Steel just said he was okay with doing it, which, by the way, just says he's okay. It doesn't even mean like he's like, yeah, I really want to do this, but doesn't try to persuade anyone. Doesn't say, come on, guys, let's all do this. So actually, you've got one person who's for the throw, one person who's neutral but will do it. So let's say like slightly above neutral. Let's say like a 6 or 7 out of 10 towards wanting to do it. So you got less than 2 out of 3 people certainly want to do the throw. If Swag doesn't want to do the throw, Skadoodle apparently it said is indifferent to the throw, so he doesn't count for 1 for or against. So at the moment we've got 1 that's eliminated. So we've got 4 people left. We've got 1 totally for it, 1 slightly for it. Swag presumably totally against it if he's trying to claim that now. All he has to do actually is go to AZK and just say, like, AZK, come on, I don't really want to do this. PM him privately. That's another thing people don't mention. Since this is all online, I know players do this all the time. If you're talking to someone in chat, you can also PM the person privately. Just say to him, listen, I don't want to do the throw. Let's just both say no. And since Skadoodle's neutral, that'll either be a tie or Skadoodle can come out and go, yeah, actually, I don't want to do it as well. In which case, 3 out of 5 have said no. Steel was only going along with it anyway. He wasn't trying to convince people, so he's not definitely on the fence. So the point I'm making here is, it's not as though there was this overwhelming majority who all said they want to do it. Because remember, people don't say AZK should be unbanned because they don't know him and don't know his personality and they don't think he's a young guy. So they, for some reason, they forget about him when they're talking about Days and Steel. They just say unbanned Swag. But in this scenario, you know, they could have easily stood up against Days and said they're not going to do it. And Days could go ahead and try and throw himself, but who knows if that would even work if 4 people say no and they're going to try and actively win the game. So there's an interesting point to make in itself. Now, he also says, Swag, that in-game he still tried his hardest, but that's also not as simple as it seems. Now, first of all, Swag did get the most kills in the first half, which was the one they only won the 4 rounds out of 15. But even with that said, he didn't win any rounds in spectacular fashion. He lost some 1v2s that were like very easy, actually. There's also the factor that even if he had tried his hardest, that doesn't suggest that he was innocent and that he was no part of the throw. Because actually, one of the stupidest parts of this throw, as I'll describe it to you, is the fact that they really don't throw in an intelligent manner. A team that good should have been leading with a slight lead for most of the game. They should have won a bunch of rounds really impressively. They should have let a couple of key 1v1s go by making a mistake, like mishearing a guy or throwing a flash that flashes themselves accidentally every now and then. They should have made it very slight as to what the things that cost them the game was, because since they are better than the other team, they actually have full control over the throw. They can play well, but just make a tiny errors that cost them the game and lose the game. I would suggest lose the game minimum 16-11, if not 16-12, and put yourself in that situation where it's like that. Instead, they lost it blatantly. They lost by a massive margin. Everyone underperformed. There were situations where like Skadoodle wasn't even buying an AWP ever. All these weird situations. So actually, even if Swag had tried his hardest, that, along with what I'm saying here, wouldn't necessarily mean he was innocent. Because actually, in a proper throw, I would even do it that way. I'd have people like Swag and Skadoodle try, but then I'd have certain people, AZK, Steel, make key errors at the wrong time, or buy the wrong gun once, or make a weird drop where they dropped the gun and didn't pick up the... Whatever the situation is, make it more minor ones, the little mistakes that could happen that could add up to a loss, because you want to lose narrowly, ideally, to make it not look like a throw. Whereas the idea is, these guys almost like were like, fuck it, and almost making it obvious it was a throw, but then since they thought no one could catch them, that's how it'd be fine. And I think that's an element of the throw, by the way, that they wanted it to look. This is a problem I've seen in StarCraft where people have thrown games. It's that people don't want to just throw the game and lose it close and have people think it's legit, even though in theory they should want it to be legit. Their ego gets involved, and part of them wants it to be where they want it to be like it's a throw. It's obvious it's a throw, but since I'm going to deny it, I can never be caught. But I kind of want my peers to know, listen, I didn't really lose that game. Like, I'm obviously better than them. I was fucking with them, but I'll never say so, so you'll just have to know that, but no one will ever catch me. I think there's an element of that involved in it. That's why I think they went so hard at it. Now then, here's what's interesting, is the Skadoodle issue. So in terms of Swag, I've already made the case there. Oh, there's one other case I forgot to mention, actually. Another interesting piece of information. So around the time that this happens, the notion is that Swag is someone who's easily influenced. He's been made to throw. He's done all these things. Consider this. A few months later, iBuyPower has this sick run. They managed to get to the final of Face It Season 2 LAN. They beat LDLC, the team that's now envious, except when they had except when they had Shocks and Smiths. They beat them in this epic 2-game series on Dust 2 and Inferno. Amazing, like, triple overtime Inferno game or whatever. This crazy game. They get to the final. They take Fnatic all the way to 4 maps, and on the 4th map they lose 14-16, so they could have got to 5 maps perhaps against the Fnatic team that then from that tournament onwards becomes the dominant force for the next year or so in Counter-Strike with that Pronax and OLFM lineup. So they do so well there. Then they go to ESWC afterwards. They make it out of groups at a big tournament. They make it to the round of 8. Here they lose to Na'Vi, but again, close fashion. I think it was like 16-12s. So close fashion to lose. People are thinking, right, this is a team that's got a chance at the major. Hey, maybe they can upset. They should get out of groups this time. You know, they're going places as a team. So what happens? Suddenly, before the major, a couple of weeks before, the roster moves are announced. Now, it had already been known behind the scenes, even before the Face It result, that Steele was eventually going to be out the lineup. But the notion was, he didn't get along with the lineup, they didn't get along with him. He wasn't able to do all the things he could do and play a more impact-style game. He had to do certain supportive roles. So instead, the notion was they were going to wait till after the major so everyone could get their sticker money, everyone could play out this last lineup since they're doing well still, and then they'll make the move. Instead, suddenly, before the major, Steele's cut and Dazed is cut. Remember, Dazed is the in-game leader. He's the one who supposedly influences everyone, and everyone does what he says. He's cut, and who's the ringleader behind the cut? Swag. Swag is the one who convinces Skadoodle and AZK, because remember, AZK's played with Dazed now for quite a long time. Skadoodle's been like the boy of the Dazed, who was always set up to succeed thanks to how Dazed used him, but he's quite an indifferent character. So in this particular scenario, Swag's the ringleader of it. Remember, in this scenario, he's getting 3 out of 5 people to stand against Dazed and Steele, and particularly Dazed, exactly what he claims he couldn't do during the throw. Now, in this scenario, he does that, and he has Dazed and Steele cut. Dazed essentially cut from his own team that he runs, and now we're in a situation where Nitro and Desi join up with iBuyPower, they go to the major, they go out in the group stage. Nitro and Desi, by the way, friends of Swag, and that's why they get recruited to the team. Even though at the time, Desi had played like a little bit from what I remember, and Nitro was like almost a complete no-name in terms of he'd played online, but he'd had like pretty much almost no LAN experience at the time. You bring him into a massive team right before major. So this was all Swag's doing. He had the most influence over the team in that particular incident. Just putting that out there. That doesn't mean, by the way, that Dazed didn't convince them and Dazed wasn't in control of the throw. I'm just putting that in there to say, but when we add this in, it's not quite as clear cut as it. It's not quite as obvious and certain just from one person's testimony that that's the way things went. And there's actually counter evidence of someone not being easily influenced and them exerting their will upon the team and convincing a majority of the team to go with their decision. So in terms of Swag, what do I actually think? I think it's a mixture of the two. I think on one hand, that Dazed came along and he presented this idea, and that the problem is, Swag wasn't against it enough to make some kind of statement or to try and rally the others. He just thought like, I mean, it's not my idea. Maybe he didn't entirely want to do it, but he thought to himself, yeah, I'll just go along with it. Like, Dazed is probably right. He's like the smart guy who knows what he's doing. We probably won't get caught. By the way, they wouldn't have gotten caught. That's the key thing as well. So he was right even. We'll make some money off it. Apparently, I'm not certain on this, but I think Swag doesn't come from like a very wealthy background. So maybe he even thought, you know what, I'm not making salary in iBuyPower right now. I haven't made much money from the major. I'll be able to make a bit of money from this as well. Hopefully we don't get caught, so it's all fine. So he just went along with it. Now, being forced to do something is very different from just going along with something where you actually don't mind either way, and maybe a part of you doesn't mind doing it, even if a part of you is not entirely comfortable with it. That's one thing right there. And I think after the fact, it's very easy to claim contrition that you never wanted to do it, but actually not everything adds up in that particular sense. I mean, okay, where are the logs? He could do this, by the way. He could release this. Let's find some logs from right after the throw where he talks to a friend or something and he says, listen, like, I wish we hadn't done that. Or a log, let's say, between him and AZK saying, why did we do that throw? What a mistake. Like, we shouldn't have done it, even though we're not going to get caught. Why does nothing like that exist? Why is nothing like that brought up when these players aren't playing together? Some of them aren't even friends anymore, and that's why they've all spilled the beans. Another factor, if they'd done the throw and he'd been forced to by Dazed, isn't it risky to then cut Dazed and to cut Steele and potentially have them later on, if they don't get in the top teams, come out and say, you know what, we did throw that game, and you know what, Swag was involved in it, and then ruin his career that way? Was that really never considered? Was that not something in the back of his mind? All these aspects make it not quite as simple to me. So I don't think Swag was a ringleader. I don't think he was the main person who wanted to, but I could believe he was on halfway in between. And that he was less against it than Skadoodle, as much as Skadoodle sounds apparently totally indifferent and doesn't give an opinion either way and lets the others decide in that particular sense. So that's interesting in and of itself. Then you move on to the Skadoodle issue. Now, let me think. So here's the point to make, okay? In terms of the Swag thing, they never would have been banned. They never would have gotten caught, and it never would have been proven under normal circumstances. If just them, Netcode Guides, if any of Netcode Guides guy knew, and the guys who brokered the deal and ran the money, if just those people shut their mouths and joined ranks and wouldn't say anything, they would have never been banned, as they didn't get banned. Remember, the story came out, we had all information, no one got banned. Now, what got them banned is when Valve had this information, which was sparked by D-Bone's girlfriend sending in the logs of what he'd said, and then Valve looking into the case, and then they tracked the skins. It wasn't until the tracking of the skins anyone got banned, because remember, that's why Skadoodle isn't banned, because there were no skins tracked going into his account. So as a result, that's the key turning point, and that's the part you couldn't anticipate, because what people don't know is the reason why D-Bone's girlfriend did this is out of spite. She was a woman scorned because D-Bone apparently, allegedly, had been unfaithful to her and slept with other girls, or been messing around with other girls, so his girlfriend got upset. She went back, looked at the log of him saying to his girlfriend, again, that's unnecessary, by the way, to admit to your girlfriend that you just did a throw and all this illegal stuff. If he hasn't done that, then they don't get banned either. That is the thing that triggered them getting done. And in fact, Richard had to go to great lengths in order to get this testimony. He had to do all sorts of shenanigans behind the scenes to get the phone, so he could get total proof that it had happened and get all the logs and stuff, and then show them to Valve, so it was like almost indisputable evidence, or at least something hinting that you're going to have to look into this. If that doesn't happen, they don't get banned. So in that scenario, that's why people like Swag, etc. probably weren't against it, because it's hard to see how you're going to get totally fucked and thrown out the whole game forever. And no one knew they'd get banned forever. In terms of Skadoodle, here's where it gets interesting, because I'd heard this about a month ago, I think, maybe more than a month ago. I'd heard this piece of information, and actually, I didn't just come out straight away with the video. I started looking into it. So what I heard was that on AZK's stream, AZK was a member of iBuyPower, he said that when the skins happened, the paying of the skins and the throw, yes, Skadoodle didn't get any skins, but not because he said, I don't want skins, and therefore didn't receive them. As in, it wasn't that they did the throw, then right afterwards the guy came and said, right, here's all your money, and then Skadoodle said, no, you know what, keep that, I don't want that. That's not the way it went down. What happened was, supposedly, the guy who came with the skins that they'd won didn't have enough skins to pay everyone. And so he paid out your days, paid out Steel, paid out Swag, paid out AZK. Skadoodle was the last one left, and the guy didn't have the skins. So the guy tells him something like, you know, like, I'll get more skins, like, I'll come back and I'll pay you back on it. Skadoodle doesn't say anything at that point in time. Then the story breaks. At this point in time, they're not going to get banned either, but the story breaks that, you know, they've done some sort of throw. Then the guy comes back with the skins, like, I've got the skins now to pay. I think it was a couple of them, maybe more than one he had to pay. But he comes back and he says, right, I've got the skins to pay people now. That's the point at which Skadoodle doesn't accept the skins. Now, here's the interesting part, is that, again, a lot of people don't know the timeline there. So they assume that because it was a properly premeditated throw, that they all would have all the skins the second they've lost the game. But that's the thing, because it was last minute, if you actually look into the storyline of D-Board and the COD guy, the guy who's the broker for it all, they were scrambling last minute to get all these accounts and to do it properly, and they fucked up some of it and made it too obvious and didn't do things like go through another third party to make it even harder to track them. And they did it in a way where once Valve tracked the transfers, it was so obvious that they'd done the throw. So actually they do that and they don't even have time, they don't have the skins left. So actually in this particular scenario, it was mismanaged, and therefore Skadoodle essentially gets two chances to say no. First time, he doesn't say no, or it's not even brought up as an issue. Second time, apparently according to this story, the guy comes with the skins after the world knows it's potentially a throw, and now Skadoodle says no. And by the way, intelligently now it turns out said no, because now there's no evidence linking him to the crime, which is a key aspect of it. Now, here's what's interesting, is that doesn't suggest that he was totally against the throw. That doesn't suggest that he wouldn't have accepted skins. In fact, one thing we can't know is that if the skins had been available at the time, we can't know whether he'd have accepted them right after the game if they'd said, here's your skins. But we don't have any evidence to suggest that he wouldn't. We don't have anything to even suggest and characterize him as a person to say that he wouldn't have done, because he didn't say at the time, you know what, I don't want skins anyway, don't go and get with them. He didn't say before the game, like, listen, you guys can throw the game, but I won't accept skins. Didn't say any of that stuff. Yes, he didn't say that he would accept them. He didn't necessarily make the case like that, but it's not as clear-cut the other way, which is what a lot of people are assuming. I notice a lot of people who are fans of Skadoodle and think he's a nice guy like Swag are doing all these mental gymnastics and backflips and trapeze runs to try and figure out ways in their mind to decide, but that shows that he wouldn't have accepted them, and since there's no evidence, you know, we have to say that he wouldn't have accepted. No, you can't say that. You can't go the other way on it. But the circumstantial evidence actually suggests that maybe he would have initially, because he didn't make some sort of statement about it. And he's never come forwards and said anything about this issue, by the way. He's never come out and said, oh, by the way, the reason I didn't accept the skins and I didn't in this particular scenario, he's never made a statement on the matter. So that alone is interesting, right? If he's so innocent, why does he not profess his innocence in any sense? He's not obliged to, but it would certainly clear up a lot of this issue, right? At least give his side of the story to go against what AZK said or to go along with what Swag said. Never bother to back anyone up on this. Remember, if AZK and Swag are both in this scenario where it's just Days and Steel leading everything, why aren't all three of them, after they've been banned, coming out with this statement, like a joint statement, all corroborating each other's story, that Days led it all, we didn't want to do it, we just accept skins at the last minute. Here's another thing. Supposedly, AZK says, everyone thought that the skins had all been paid out. They didn't know that Skadoodle comes along and Skadoodle turns the skins down. That wasn't initially known. Like, other people might have accepted them, I think he said something like that, thinking that everyone's getting the skins and that we're all complicit in it, and not knowing that Skadoodle turned down, or even it's an option to turn it down at this point. We've already done the crime. We've already committed the crime, right? You wouldn't think of that as an aspect. Well, that's what's going to track you in that particular sense. In fact, I just need to clarify one thing that I forgot to mention as I was on that rant there, which is when I went back and looked at the log of when I talked to AZK, he actually says that he's not sure if Skadoodle would have taken the skins if the guy had them at the time, but that about a week after the throw, Dazed had asked him if he wanted his cut of the skins, and then Skadoodle declined it. Now, the others didn't know this. In fact, let me see what he says here. He says that when AZK himself and Swag took their skins, they thought Skadoodle had accepted the skins. So again, they weren't offered the same option there he was, and they didn't know necessarily that this was the circumstance. It wasn't like they were all in a group, and then he just bravely came forward, I will not accept the skins, this is wrong. And they were like, oh, okay, but we will take it, definitely came, because we're all criminals. It wasn't as simple as that. So anyway, that's just the facts of that. So here's the key thing to note. Don't worry if you're a fan of Skadoodle, like, oh, but the problem is if I think about this issue, and if it does turn out that we all decide Skadoodle might have accepted the skins, then maybe he should be banned as well. Don't worry about it. Because remember, the only thing that got them banned was that they accepted the skins. So Skadoodle will not be banned, even if he comes out tomorrow and says, I would have accepted the skins. Because in that scenario, he didn't, therefore it's still unlikely he would actually be banned. And he's not going to come out and say that anyway. So don't worry about that. He's not getting banned. This is just an interesting thought experiment to have because people love Skadoodle and Swag so much and they hate Steel and Daze. So it's so black and white to them as to who did what and who should be banned and who's innocent and who's guilty. Whereas there's clearly a level of guilt across everyone here, even just purely in terms of being complicit and allowing other people to do things. Now, there's also the factor when you go forwards in the lineup that in this game, Skadoodle himself, in Swag's comments to Richard Lewis, he even says that Skadoodle had been indifferent to the idea. Not that Skadoodle was against it, not that he said, you guys do it, but I'm not going to do it. You guys do it, but I don't want skins. He was just indifferent. He was like, either way, whatever, we can do whatever you want. And he's just going to go along with it. Now, that's not standing up against it. You accept part of the guilt when you do part of that scenario. Not all of it, but you're certainly culpable to some degree, especially if a later fact, you would have benefited the same way. If that was the case, then you're certainly culpable. Now, in this particular game, if Skadoodle wasn't trying to throw the game in any way, he didn't want to be any part of it, and he was just letting the others do it, and he wasn't going to accept the skins anyway, then why does Skadoodle not try? And the reason why I say he doesn't try, Skadoodle at the time did not have good rifles. He doesn't have great rifles now, he just has okay rifles, like above average, but not good rifles. He doesn't buy an AWP a single round of this game. But AWPs are bought. Steal AWPs all the time. Daze gets scouts and gets AWPs. Skadoodle does not buy a single AWP. He has rifles only and pistols. He does not buy an AWP once. That alone is very suspicious. He was the primary AWP of that team, and every round, someone like Daze wants an AWP in his hand, but he's never even buying it. So he's being either totally coerced and he's willing to just let them do so, or he's just deciding himself not to buy the AWP to help the throw happen. There's also the fact that when later on, let's look at how easily influenced Skadoodle is. So after the fact, when everyone's banned except Skadoodle, Hiko's already left Cloud9 to make a super team with those XI by Power players, and they were going to make it and join Evil Geniuses, but they all get banned, so the deal's off. So Hiko and Skadoodle, two of the best players in NA, are left in no man's land. Now, they could have both gone back and joined Cloud9. They could have both joined CLG. They could have both joined Team Liquid. All these options were on the table. All these teams are talking to them. Instead, they hold out and they wait, and Hiko's brokering deals with them, and he's like, we're a package, the two of us. They're talking with all these orgs. He's talking with Team Liquid, and they were going to make a team where if, like, Adren, Fugly and Nitro left Liquid, they were going to go make a new org, but then Team Liquid want them to join Team Liquid instead, which obviously he could do after the fact, but didn't want to at the time because of how Adren's control would be within the org, which obviously has actually turned out to be an issue. And so in the end, while they're waiting, Hiko and Skadoodle go and they stand in for, I think it was Elevate at CEVO Season 6 finals, was it? 6 or 5? I think it was 6. And they make it to the final, but they lose to CLG there, but they smash Neelam on the way. So they go along and they play in the slide up together, but then after the fact, while they're still negotiating, Skadoodle comes along and he says to Hiko, you know what, I'm just going to join Cloud9, I'm going to accept this, I've got this sick offer, like, mad money signing bonus, it's a really good offer, I'm going to go and join them, I'm not going to stick with you anymore. And he goes off and he joins Cloud9, he's now a Cloud9 member. So again, in this scenario, Hiko's supposed to be the guy who's the dominant personality, who's the one influencing, who's saying, this is what we're doing and I speak for both of us, yet in this scenario, just as Swag in another scenario went against Dave's wishes and even directly against them, now Skadoodle does something other than what Hiko wants and does it of his own accord, decides for himself and has no issue doing so. When it's a money issue and there's an issue of like, are we sticking together, are we doing whatever, he doesn't just go along with the crowd. So there's more evidence that not necessarily the case that these guys are just, it's not black and white that these guys are evil meat masterminds and the other ones are guys who are just, oh, these are so white as snow, they're so innocent, these guys, they would never say anything and they're so easily influenced by these mesmerist, hypnotist, evil guys, Dazed, Steel and Hiko. No, it's not as clear cut as that. People make their own decisions to some degree, even if the decision is go along with what the others are saying. That's not a good option itself. And Skadoodle isn't as young as Swag, by the way. Now then, there is an issue here quite clearly that because people hate Steel and Dazed, and even Hiko to an extent, he's not really involved in the throwing thing, they deflect all the blame from Swag, to a degree AZK, the people who are fans of his, and Skadoodle, onto those guys and say they did everything, these guys did nothing. Yet you're seeing, even if those guys did do something, Steel and Dazed to different degrees, it's not that the other guys did absolutely the opposite and they were just battled out over. They just did nothing, or they were slightly in favour of it, not maximally in favour, and then afterwards regretted the fact. They didn't go the other way. It's not that they're innocent, they were neutral to it and went along with the crime, and then some of them accepted money for it, which is actually the benefit of the crime. They benefit from their crime. And in the case of Skadoodle, might even have benefited from the crime, but then was essentially given this unique window that no one else was given. As far as I know, this is something I've talked to AZK, I've talked to Steel. I tried investigating this matter before I went live with it all. As far as I know, I'm not sure if there was another person who hadn't got paid the skins yet, but like I said, everyone assumed everyone else was getting the skins. And secondly, most people wouldn't have realised, especially the ones who got paid the skins really early on, that once the story's broken, now you have a different motivation to turn down the skins, rather than just thinking it's wrong and not wanting to be part of it. Now you know there's a chance this could be dangerous one day, and you could get caught one day. Maybe you don't need money in the same way some of the other people do. So you say, you know what, fuck it, won't even take the chance. That's a window and an opportunity that not everyone in the team necessarily got. If everyone else got that opportunity, maybe some of the rest of them would turn it down. Maybe they wouldn't be banned right now, even though maybe some of them went along with the throw, but would realise, right, this is too dangerous actually. If it's already out there, maybe one day it can get done. I'm not going to take any chances. So that's a different circumstance. I don't think it's fair to judge the others in the same way that you're judging Skadoodle and letting him off because he didn't accept the skins. Maybe they didn't have the same options that he did. So, should Skadoodle be banned? Now, under these circumstances, he probably should receive some kind of punishment. Not a massive ban, the same way the others did, because he didn't accept the skins. But he took part in the throw. He never attempted to speak out against the throw. Even after the fact of the throw, he never came forward and provided any evidence. So he showed a great deal of complicity in this whole aspect. He's certainly gone along with it in a number of scenarios. The circumstances of others suggesting that he might even have ended up with the same result and would have gotten banned as a result, but didn't, so he's avoided it in that sense. Probably should have got some minor ban, 3 months, 6 months, maybe skip a major, something like that I think would have been reasonable at that point in time. Now, should the others have been banned? I've gone over this many times. I think they should have been banned. I think something like 2 years. So it's like it's a very harsh ban, but they had done some egregious stuff like do it, and then some of them had spoken out against Richard Lewis and tried to fuck him over, and then denied they've done it a million times. Denying it's one thing. It's just the way that they did go a bit over the top with it. I do think that it's self-preservation to deny it, and until you know you're going to be caught, which you don't until you know about the D1's girlfriend shit, it would make sense to deny it. And I think that's only reasonable. You can't go against someone's human nature in that sense and expect them to just fair cop gov, I'm guilty immediately with no evidence. So I think there should be a set period of time. There should have been from day one. If they're going to be banned forever, that should have been said from day one as well, and that they should never hope to get in the game again. That would have been a lot fairer. I think it's unfair for them to be banned forever. I don't think that's an issue. I think there should be some kind of community option or a rehabilitation option to show that you can get over this. I think Valve took their shame of having this happen in their game, and they've deflected a lot of that onto iBuyPower and used them as figures of hatred as well to deflect all the negative energy onto them, that some of it should be on Valve, and the fact that they allow these things and the fact that they don't have a good system in place to decide how people would be punished. So there should be different punishments, in my opinion, for the people within the team. They should probably get the worst. Steel should be maybe up there. Some of the others should certainly receive a punishment, though. Skadoodle should probably get a punishment, maybe the least of all, because he didn't accept the skins. But there should be a hierarchy of punishments, just as in the Mafia, you don't, as the grunt, get the same punishment as the head guy. But if you're further up in the hierarchy and you didn't necessarily say no and you played an active involvement, you will also get some punishment within it. I think it's a murky area in all cases, and it's not black and white for anyone as to what they did in this particular scenario, because you don't know what the circumstances were, and some of the circumstantial evidence points against what the current consensus is. So I thought it's an interesting topic to talk about anyway.
Guys, I'm DW. I have won 3 majors in CSGO, and this is Thorin's YouTube channel.